Hello everyone, MilkmanAl here with a build guide for a Last Epoch Cold Sorcerer. The skills I'm using are Frozen Orb and Ice Barrage, and I found this build so enjoyable and so powerful that I just had to share it with you so you could feel the power. Right, so before I get into it, if you enjoy this video, please subscribe here, hit the like button. That would really help me out. You can follow me live at twitch.tv/milkmanal1. I'm there most nights, 8 to 10 p.m. Central. So, anyway, let's dive right into it. This build is fantastic. I totally recommend it to anybody. So let's start with skills. So, first off, we've got Ice Barrage, as I mentioned. We've got Volcanic Orb, which is converted to Frozen Orb through the passive tree. Flame Ward, Focus, and Teleport are the skills that I'm using. So let's have a look at the trees, shall we? Alright, so, Ice Barrage. We basically take a whole bunch of damage with a few things to sort of enhance the function of it. This Ice Burst on activation is nice for kind of clearing stuff in your immediate vicinity. And I chose to get this point just, for an extra little punch. 40% damage is a whole lot. This is actually the tree that I had the most problem with, because there are so many things that are beneficial to this build. Specifically, this build is a crit build that also focuses on ward. So I have focused my points accordingly. This skill right here is a very, very good passive for this build, but I just didn't have the points to go into it, as you can see. This and this, also very effective, but again, not enough points to go around. So this skill right here is what I feel absolutely drives this skill. So what you're basically looking at is double your rate of fire, so double your damage, essentially, against rare and unique enemies, which includes bosses, right? So it's a lot of extra damage, and it allows you to run around like a headless chicken when you're evading big attacks and still do tons of damage to bosses. So this is essentially kind of like DPS light. It's amazing. This passive is the only one that I absolutely do not recommend unless you go the route that makes the Ice Burst the only thing that you're using, because the homing is basically the best part about this skill. Because as I said, you can use it as a just constant DPS method when you're trying to evade boss attacks. So next up is Volcanic Orb. We've got the good old Volcanic Orb. This is your main clearing, like mob clearing and burst damage skill. So I focused a little bit on the cold aspect of it to enhance the freezing and extra damage against chilled targets, because I chill basically everything. And the freeze multi is very helpful. The points on this side are essentially just extra damage. The explosive ground is a whole lot of extra clear and damage on large single target situations, like big bosses in particular. This skill, or this passive, is a bit on the questionable side. So you don't actually want Volcanic Orb, or Frozen Orb in this case, moving very fast, because the orb itself is damaging, and you want it to stay on top of its target as much as possible. So having it move faster is bad. But, as we'll get to later, there are idols that you can use to slow down your orb. So this extra damage is worth the speed increase, in my opinion. But notice that I only have 1 point in this. I don't think that you can compensate for too much speed increase, and you don't want to basically make it so the orb moves off of bosses. And I'll give a demonstration of how exactly this build works later on. So Flame Ward, pretty straightforward. Basically just take all of the things that give you extra ward, and all of the things that give you damage reduction. Less hit damage is a huge deal. So I make sure to take all of those points. And there's a little bit of ward retention there, just to make sure that, you know, your ward doesn't wear off immediately. A little bit of extra ward granted, though that's less of a focus than actually just preventing damage. Focus is kind of a necessary evil, because this build eats mana like it's going out of style. Consequently, I focused on the mana regen aspect of it a fair bit. But I feel like this is a fair deterrent to taking it. The cooldown reduction, or excuse me, cooldown increase is kind of a ball breaker because you use focus so frequently. So instead of that, we use the haste after channeling and the extra ward options. And those have worked out pretty well so far. Teleport, mostly about defensive posturing. So the decoys are very, very helpful, especially when you're trying to get away from either a boss or a big mob, which are pretty much the only things that are dangerous to this build. So I invested heavily in that. That's angle of the tree, and then also the ward generation once again. All of these things result in pretty hefty ward bonus when you teleport, and that is really nice, because generally if you teleport, you're trying to get out of a sticky situation. So, those are the skills in short. Let's have a look at the passive tree. So the passives, I mostly, in the intro mage tree, I mostly focused on damage. As I mentioned, this is a crit character, so I took the critical node, and also enhanced my passives. And this is the passive that allows Volcanic Orb to become Frozen Orb, which is great. This is just sort of a nice quality of life passive. It's worth 1 point in my opinion. So 1 point it has. The rest of this is just sort of general buffs that I threw some extra points in. Some extra ward, a little bit of ward retention, extra intelligence and resists, nothing fancy. So in the sorcerer, it's more of the same. So basically I bolstered my ability to freeze, my cold damage with some leech, a couple ward passives here and there, enhanced my crit multi, crit chance for spells, and recently I've been filling up things like this, which give sort of just quality of life / extra damage bonuses. And this is the passive that I'm working on currently. A sleeper gem is not that one, it's this. So whenever you take a hit that leaves you below half health, you freeze nearby enemies. As we will get to, you will be going below half health very frequently. Also, a weird aspect of this skill is it seems to freeze way more than 3 things. Like, basically it'll freeze everything around you. So this is a very, very useful defensive node. As you can see, I've sunk a couple points into it, but I'm not sure it needs more than that because everything already gets frozen. Up here, we just have massive damage bonuses for, you know, having mana. Cooldown recovery speed, always awesome. So currently, I am level 92. If you are dedicated, you can have much more passive points than this. So you get an extra 8 passives to work with in theory, right? So those are my passive skills. Basically just increasing the crit, increasing the freeze, and then some quality of life / defensive stuff. So, gearing, what do we have? One nice thing about this build is the weapon is a unique that's pretty common in my experience. This one happens to be extremely well rolled, as you can see here. So this is not quite best in slot, but it's certainly by far the easiest thing to get. And especially for a crit build, when you pair it with something like this that has extra base crit chance for spells, it's really tough to beat that combo. So I would call my gear pretty good. I'm not really sure that it's very good. Most things have multiple tier 5 affixes on them with some pretty rare class-specific mods, but there is definitely room for improvement, as you can see with this chest. So these are all very good, and they work well together. But there are improvements to be made for sure, and this build already rocks the endgame. So one thing that I sort of dislike about a lot of build guides is they don't give you a chance to look at all the gear and ogle it, so I'm going to make sure that that's not a problem right now. I feel like this build is this belt is fantastic, and I got this from a vendor. I think I crafted maybe one extra level, and it's great. So rings also could use improvement. Gloves can use improvement. The boots are actually what drives this build, believe it or not. And we'll talk about that in just a second. And that's my relic. I could improve that as well, pretty substantially. This helmet is a fantastic unique to use. I used this for a really, really long time until I crafted this. It's a great quality of life. It's a very strong defensive helmet, also a very common unique. So I definitely, and as you can see, you can wear it at level 10. So this is a really nice helmet to have. And it took quite a bit to convince me to move on from the huge chance to chill and to blind. So that's what I like about this build, is that it's really easy to get started and get some good gear for. Unfortunately, leveling this build is a bit of a problem. So your options are Lightning Blast, Elemental Nova, Glacier to some extent. I think Glacier is probably your best option. I found Lightning Blast extremely difficult to use. I felt like it was very, very weak. I think I ultimately got it up to like level 15, and it just was not cutting it. It was not doing a great job of being my clear skill. Elemental Nova was much better, but it did sort of eat my mana when you spam it. Glacier is a little bit awkward to use. Not terrible, but the delayed explosions are a little bit tough to work around. Once you get Frozen Orb, you're going to have huge mana problems. It is extremely expensive to cast. As you can see, 147 mana currently for me. So you will find yourself in a mana deficit constantly, especially since you get this before you get focus. I think ultimately, Glacier and Elemental Nova is probably your best option, though it's possible that Fireball might be a better choice. So, with that in mind, why don't we take this build for a little bit of a spin, shall we, so you can see it in action. You'll notice that my boots have essentially eaten my life away in exchange for this ward. So the way that this build stays super tanky is that I have a fair amount of damage leech. So I have this, I have leech from this, and also 1.5% of cold damage is leeched. That essentially results in this like ping-ponging of ward and life, is as I leech life, it'll degenerate from this, which causes me to lose 13% of health per second, and I am constantly generating ward, also because of this. So I'm like basically sliding between having max ward and max health all the time, so my effective health pool is gigantic. And I am really hard to kill. So really the only things that I've had a significant problem with getting past are giant boss slams, of which there are a few, and mass torrents. So like tons of ranged area of effect attacks are a problem. So like getting shotgunned, especially by like spires in maps where there are like 3 spires that you have to kill, that's an issue. But here we go. The beauty of live broadcasting. Here's an area where I died. Isn't that nice? I think that was an arena. So let's go over here. And I'll show you how this works. So the idea is basically I will cast Ice Barrage and just run through the map and achieve whatever I need. Okay, Blood Spires, here we go. So you'll see how quickly you can move through these maps. It's not quite Path of Exile walking simulator levels, but it's pretty close. So I'll basically just cast Ice Barrage and just run around, and once I develop a big enough monster train, I stop and cast Frozen Orb. And then everything disappears. And hopefully I'll be able to get next to a unique monster or rare monster and show you how fast Ice Barrage starts casting. It is ridiculous. So I'm going to stop here, get some mana real quick under the cover of a Frozen Orb, pick up some shards. Why not?
I cannot do that.
So you can see when I cast the Ice Barrage, it has those extra ice shards that go out from me. So keep in mind that this is an empowered Echo, so this is like total in-game content. This is essentially as hard as it gets. Yeah, so those extra shards really help clear packs around you when you're having to stop and refresh your Ice Barrage. I think that's totally worth taking. And it's really nice that it lets you essentially just run through everything, as you can see. There we go. Echo down. Simple as that, right? One thing that I did not point out is that that Scepter, which I mentioned is basically real close to best in slot, it gives you an ability called Tundra Nova, which makes Ice Barrage a really, really, really good area clear for trash mobs. So that is an excellent thing to have, because Ice Barrage hits so frequently that you're going to be casting that Nova very often. Alright, well let's talk about the idols real quick, because actually that is sort of what drives the build. So I focused with the smaller idols on health. These are the best I've found health-wise. There's some extra damage leech, which again helps the ward, the interplay of the ward generation and life leech. Just more ward retention and health. This is the awesome, awesome, awesome idol that I found. Don't count on finding one of these, but the orb damage and orb speed is really all you need. So, as I mentioned, when you cast Volcanic Orb, this orb does damage to a boss. So as you can see on the screen, anything that goes between here and here, or any boss that's like that size, will take damage throughout the duration of the orb from all of those, all of the shrapnel, all of these little exploding ground things, and the orb itself. So that ends up being a huge amount of damage. And this idol makes me cast Frostbite constantly, which is a cold damage over time debuff, and also debuffs the monster's freeze resistance, so you freeze things more often. Let's look at my character sheet real quick. So I have 29 int. My resistances can actually use some work, but despite those, I'm still very tanky, as I mentioned. I believe my next project for this character is to shore these resistances up, and then also work into endurance, which I basically don't have any of. But that's probably the most realistic and most helpful thing that I can do, because I am at low life so often. It will be easy for me to hit my endurance threshold and reduce my damage even further. So, as you can see, I have a fair amount of crit multi. I crit a lot with my spells because I have such a high base crit chance because of that. Defense, essentially non-existent. I'm pretty much totally reliant on resistances and effective health pool. And I have a lot of freeze multi. A whole freaking lot of freeze multi, so lots of things freeze all the time. And that is a nice defensive layer to have. So, again, totally recommend this character. I hope you found this guide entertaining and useful. Again, please click the like and subscribe buttons. Follow me live on Twitch 8 to 10 p.m. Central at twitch.tv/MilkmanAl. MilkmanAl1. Thanks for watching, everybody. Appreciate it. Happy hunting.